The wheel broke loose just as the stagecoach rounded the sharp bend, sending Katherine Hayes flying through the open door and into the massive snowbank that lined the mountain pass, her scream cutting through the frigid January air of 1882 like a knife through butter. Frank Iverson had been riding his chestnut mare alongside the trail when he saw the whole thing happen. The stagecoach lurched violently to one side, the door swung wide, and a woman in a green traveling dress tumbled out like a rag doll, disappearing into the white powder that had accumulated during last night's storm. Without a second thought, Frank spurred his horse forward, his heart hammering in his chest as he raced toward the spot where she had vanished. The stagecoach driver managed to bring the damaged vehicle to a stop about 50 yards down the road, the other passengers shouting and scrambling inside. But Frank had no time to wait for them. He leaped from his saddle while his mare was still moving, landing hard in the snow and immediately pushing through the waist-deep drift toward where he had seen the woman disappear. "Madam! Madam, can you hear me?" he called out, his breath forming white clouds in the freezing air. His hands dug frantically through the snow, searching for any sign of her. The cold bit through his leather gloves, but he did not slow down. Then he saw it. A flash of green fabric beneath the white. He pulled harder, clearing away armfuls of snow until he could see her face. She was conscious, thank God, but gasping for air, her dark hair plastered against her pale cheeks, her brown eyes wide with shock and fear. "I have got you," Frank said, his voice steady despite his racing pulse. He slid his arms beneath her shoulders and knees, lifting her from the snowbank with a strength born from years of ranch work. She was shivering violently, her teeth chattering so hard he could hear them clicking together. "The stage," she managed to say through her trembling. "My trunk." "Do not worry about that right now," Frank told her, carrying her toward his horse. "We need to get you warm before you freeze to death." The stagecoach driver and 2 male passengers were finally making their way back through the snow. "Is she all right?" the driver called out, his weathered face creased with concern. "She will be if I can get her somewhere warm," Frank replied. "How far to the next town?" "Yuba City is still 15 miles south," the driver said, shaking his head. "But there is a line cabin about 2 miles east of here. I know the rancher who owns it. He would not mind if you used it." Frank nodded. 2 miles he could manage. "Which way?" The driver pointed toward a barely visible trail that cut through the pine trees. "Follow that path. You will see it once you crest the first ridge. Small log cabin with a red door." "What about her things?" one of the passengers asked. "Bring them to Yuba City," Frank said. "We will collect them later. Right now she needs shelter and a fire." He did not wait for a response. With the woman still in his arms, shaking like a leaf in a windstorm, he somehow managed to get them both onto his horse. She sat in front of him, and he wrapped his heavy coat around her shoulders, holding her steady with one arm while guiding the mare with the other. "What is your name?" he asked as they started along the trail. He needed to keep her talking, keep her conscious. Katherine," she stammered. "Katherine Hayes. I am Frank Iverson. You are going to be fine, Katherine. Just stay with me." "So, sea cold," she whispered. "I know. We are almost there." It was a lie. 2 miles in this snow would take at least 30 minutes, maybe more. But he needed to give her hope. Frank urged his mare forward, the horse's breath coming in heavy snorts as she pushed through the accumulated snow. The trail was barely visible, but his mare knew these mountains well. They had ridden this territory countless times over the past 5 years, ever since he had come to California from Texas to start fresh after the war had taken everything from him. Catherine's shivering seemed to be getting worse. Her whole body shook against him, and he pulled her closer, trying to share what warmth he had. Her hair smelled like lavender despite the snow and cold, and he found himself noticing details he should not be noticing. The curve of her jaw, the way her eyelashes were dark against her pale skin, the small scar above her left eyebrow. "Tell me about yourself," he said, needing to keep her engaged. "Where were you headed?" "Yuba City," she managed. "My brother, He has a farm there. I was coming from Sacramento. What were you doing in Sacramento? Working as a teacher. Her voice was getting quieter, and that worried him. Katherine, I need you to keep talking to me. Tell me about teaching. Do you like it? She nodded against his chest. The children, they are wonderful. But my brother wrote that he needs help with his daughters. His wife passed last spring. Childbirth. Frank's chest tightened. He knew that story too well. His own mother had died the same way when he was 12, taking his baby sister with her. I am sorry to hear that. How old are his daughters? 6 and 8. Mary and Jane. I have not seen them in 3 years. They will be happy to have you. If I live to get there, she whispered. You will, Frank said firmly. I promise you that. The trail climbed higher, and Frank could feel his mare struggling. He hated to push her so hard, but Katherine's life might depend on it. The cold was brutal this high up in the Sierra Nevada mountains, and her wet clothes would only make things worse. Finally, after what felt like hours, but was probably only 40 minutes, he saw the cabin. It was exactly as the driver had described, a small log structure with a red door, nestled in a clearing surrounded by towering pines. Smoke was not coming from the chimney, which meant it was empty, but that was fine. He could start a fire. Frank dismounted carefully, keeping Katherine secure in his arms. She had gone quiet, which terrified him more than her shivering had. He kicked the door open and carried her inside. The cabin was basic but well maintained. A single room with a stone fireplace, a rough-hewn bed frame with a straw mattress, a table with 2 chairs, and shelves stocked with supplies. Someone had left firewood stacked beside the hearth. He laid Katherine on the bed and immediately went to work starting a fire. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, arranging kindling and wood, striking flint until a spark caught. Within minutes, flames were crackling in the fireplace, beginning to push back the cold. But Katherine was still shivering, still soaked through. Frank knew what needed to be done, even if it made him uncomfortable. Katherine, I need to get you out of those wet clothes. You will freeze if you stay in them. Her eyes flickered open, unfocused. Improper, she murmured. Necessary, he corrected gently. I will be a gentleman about it, I promise. He found blankets on a shelf, rough wool but clean and dry. Working as quickly and respectfully as he could, he helped her out of her wet dress, petticoats, and undergarments, keeping his eyes averted as much as possible. His own face felt hot despite the cold. He had been raised to respect women, and this felt like a violation of everything he believed in, but he also knew it was the only way to save her life. Once she was wrapped in the dry blankets, he positioned her as close to the fire as was safe. Then he went back outside to tend to his mare, leading her to a small lean-to shelter attached to the cabin. He removed her saddle and rubbed her down as best he could with handfuls of dry grass he found stored in the shelter. She deserved that much after carrying them both through the snow. When he came back inside, Katherine's color looked a bit better. The fire was roaring now, filling the cabin with warmth. He hung her wet clothes over a rope he strung between 2 wall hooks, then checked the supplies. Coffee, beans, flour, salt pork, dried apples. Whoever maintained this cabin kept it well stocked for emergencies. He sent a silent thanks to that unknown rancher. Frank started coffee and beans cooking over the fire. It was simple fare, but it would be hot, and right now that was what mattered. While the food heated, he pulled one of the chairs close to the bed and sat down, watching Katherine's face for any signs of distress. Her eyes opened after a few minutes. Brown eyes, he noticed again. The color of rich earth after rain. Where are we? She asked, her voice stronger than before. Line cabin. About 2 miles from where you fell. How are you feeling? Like I was thrown from a stagecoach, she said, and to his surprise, a small smile tugged at her lips. Frank found himself smiling back. Well, that is accurate at least. Does anything hurt? Did you break anything? Katherine moved carefully beneath the blankets, testing her limbs. Everything hurts, but I do not think anything is broken. The snow must have cushioned my fall. You were lucky. I have seen falls like that kill people. Then I suppose I owe you my life. Her eyes met his, and something passed between them. Something Frank could not quite name, but felt in his chest like a physical thing. You do not owe me anything. I did what anyone would have done. I do not think that is true, but thank you all the same. She paused, seeming to become aware of her state of undress beneath the blankets. Her cheeks flushed pink. Did you have to? Yes, Frank said simply. Your clothes were soaked through. You would have died from the cold. I suppose that makes sense. She looked toward the fire. How long do we have to stay here? Frank glanced toward the single small window. Snow was falling again, harder than before. Until the storm passes, and you are strong enough to ride. Maybe tomorrow if we are lucky. Maybe longer if we are not. Katherine absorbed this information quietly. My brother will worry. The stagecoach driver will reach Yuba City and tell him what happened. He will know you are safe. Will he, though? He will know I am with a strange man in a cabin in the mountains. Her voice held a note of concern that Frank understood immediately. Reputation mattered, especially for a woman, especially for an unmarried teacher. Then we will deal with that when the time comes, Frank said. Right now, staying alive is more important than what people might think. She nodded slowly. You're right. I am sorry. I am being ungrateful. You are being practical. There is a difference. He stood and checked the beans, which were starting to bubble. Are you hungry? Starving, actually. Frank dished up 2 plates of beans and salt pork, poured 2 cups of coffee, and brought them to the bed. Katherine managed to sit up, keeping the blankets wrapped around her, and accepted the plate gratefully. They ate in companionable silence for a while. The storm raged outside, wind howling through the pines, but inside the cabin was warm and safe. Frank found himself stealing glances at Katherine when he thought she was not looking. Even disheveled from her ordeal, she was beautiful. Not in the painted saloon girl way, but in a natural, genuine way that made his heart do strange things in his chest. Tell me about yourself, Katherine said suddenly. Where are you from? What do you do? Frank set down his coffee cup. I am from Texas originally. Came to California 5 years ago looking for a fresh start. I work at the Double Bar Ranch about 10 miles from Yuba City. Been there ever since I arrived. What made you leave Texas? Frank hesitated. He did not usually talk about the past. The war. Lost my father and 2 brothers in it. Lost the ranch after. There was nothing left for me there. Katherine's expression softened. I am so sorry. That must have been terrible. It was a long time ago. I have made peace with it. That was not entirely true, but it was what he told people. And you never married? Started a family of your own? No. Never seemed to be the right time. Or the right person. He met her eyes. What about you? No husband waiting in Sacramento? Katherine shook her head. No. Teaching does not leave much time for courting, and the men who were interested usually wanted a wife who would stay home, not one who insisted on working. That seems short-sighted of them. I thought so too. She smiled, and Frank felt that strange pull in his chest again. They talked through the afternoon and into the evening. Katherine told him about growing up in Ohio, about the journey west with her brother and his wife 10 years ago, about her decision to become a teacher when her brother settled in Yuba City and she continued on to Sacramento. Frank found himself telling her things he had not told anyone in years, about his childhood in Texas, about learning to ride before he could walk, about his mother's garden and how the roses had smelled on summer evenings. As darkness fell, the reality of their situation became apparent. There was one bed, and neither of them was in any condition to sleep on the floor. Frank could see Katherine worrying at her lower lip, clearly thinking the same thing. I can sleep in the chair, Frank offered, though he knew it would be a miserable night. Katherine looked at him for a long moment. Do not be ridiculous. You saved my life. I am not going to make you sleep in a chair. The bed is big enough for both of us if we are sensible about it. Are you sure? I do not want to make you uncomfortable. I am already uncomfortable. At least this way we will both be warm. She smiled slightly. I trust you, Frank. You have been nothing but a gentleman. So when the fire burned low and exhaustion finally overtook them both, they lay down on opposite sides of the bed, maintaining a careful distance. Frank kept his clothes on, and Katherine remained wrapped in her blankets. He stared at the ceiling, acutely aware of her presence beside him, of her breathing, of the small sounds she made as she shifted, trying to get comfortable. Frank, she whispered in the darkness. Yes? Thank you for everything. You are welcome, Katherine. He heard her breathing deepen and slow, and eventually, despite the strange circumstances, he fell asleep too. Frank woke in the gray light of dawn to find Katherine curled against his side, seeking warmth in her sleep. His arm was around her, holding her close, though he had no memory of reaching for her. For a moment he just lay there, aware that he should move but reluctant to disturb her. She looked peaceful in sleep, her face relaxed, her dark hair spread across the rough pillow. Then her eyes opened, and she realized where she was. He felt her stiffen. I am sorry, she said quickly, starting to pull away. I must have been cold. It is all right, Frank said, though he immediately missed her warmth when she moved to the other side of the bed. How are you feeling? Sore, but better. She sat up, keeping the blankets wrapped around her. Has the storm stopped? Frank got up and looked out the window. The snow had stopped falling, and pale sunlight was breaking through the clouds. Looks like it. Your clothes should be dry by now. I will step outside while you get dressed, then we can head to Yuba City. He gave her privacy, going out to check on his mare and assess the trail conditions. The snow was deep but manageable. They could make it to town by midday if they started soon. He found himself strangely reluctant to leave the cabin, this small bubble of warmth and unexpected intimacy they had created. When Katherine called that she was dressed, he came back inside. Her green dress was wrinkled but dry, and she had managed to pin her hair up into something resembling respectability. She looked beautiful and completely improper at the same time, and Frank felt his heart twist. Ready? He asked. She nodded. As ready as I will ever be. The ride to Yuba City took 3 hours. Katherine sat in front of Frank again, but this time there was no emergency, no excuse for how close they had to be. He was aware of every point where their bodies touched, aware of her hair brushing against his chin, aware of how perfectly she seemed to fit in his arms. They talked as they rode, continuing the easy conversation they had started in the cabin. Katherine told him about the books she loved, about teaching children to read, about her dreams of maybe starting a school of her own someday. Frank told her about working with horses, about the satisfaction of training a wild Mustang, about the beauty of watching the sun rise over the mountains. Yuba City emerged from the winter landscape like a promise. The town had grown since Frank had last visited, new buildings springing up along the main street. The Feather River ran alongside the town, mostly frozen over now, but Frank knew in spring it would be rushing with snowmelt from the mountains. Where does your brother live? Frank asked. He has a farm north of town, about 2 miles out. A white house with a red barn. Frank knew the place. He had helped deliver supplies there once. I know it. Good land. As they rode through town, Frank was aware of people staring. A man and a woman riding together, her clothes wrinkled, his arm around her. He could practically hear the gossip starting. Katherine must have noticed too because she tensed against him. Let them talk, Frank said quietly. We know the truth. The truth does not always matter in small towns. She had a point, but there was nothing to be done about it now. They continued through town and out the north road. Catherine's brother's farm appeared after about 20 minutes of riding. The White House looked well maintained, smoke rising from the chimney. A red barn stood behind it, and Frank could see cattle in a nearby pasture. Before they reached the house, the front door flew open. A man came running out, his face a mixture of relief and concern. He was about 30, with the same dark hair as Catherine, though his was streaked with gray at the temples. "Kate!" he shouted. "God, thank God! We heard what happened." Frank helped Catherine down from the horse, and she immediately ran to her brother, embracing him tightly. "I am fine, Thomas. I am fine." Thomas Hayes held his sister for a long moment before looking over her shoulder at Frank. His expression was guarded, assessing. "You the one who pulled her out of the snow?" "Yes, sir. Frank Iverson." Thomas came forward, extending his hand. His grip was firm when Frank shook it. "The stage driver told me what you did. Said my sister would have frozen to death if you had not gotten her to that cabin. I owe you a debt." "No debt. I did what anyone would do." "Still." Thomas looked between Frank and Catherine, and Frank could see the wheels turning in his mind. "Where did you two spend the night?" "The line cabin up on the Ridge Pass," Frank said evenly. "It was the closest shelter. The storm came back, and there was no way to make it to town." Thomas's jaw tightened, but before he could speak, Catherine stepped forward. "He was a perfect gentleman, Thomas. He saved my life, and I will not have you treating him with suspicion." "Kate, you do not understand. In a town this size, people talk. If word gets out that you spent the night alone with a man, unchaperoned, your reputation will be ruined. You will not be able to teach." "Then people can keep their mouths shut," Catherine said firmly, but Frank could see the worry in her eyes. She knew her brother was right. Frank made a decision. It was impulsive and possibly foolish, but it felt right in a way that nothing had felt right in a very long time. "Then I will marry her." Both Catherine and Thomas stared at him. Catherine's mouth fell open. "What?" "If reputation is the concern, then marriage solves it. We can say we were engaged, that I was escorting you to your brother's farm. The accident just accelerated our timeline." Frank looked at Catherine, trying to read her expression. "If you are willing." "You cannot be serious," Catherine said. "We barely know each other." "I know you well enough. I know you are brave and intelligent and kind. I know you love your family and care about your students. I know you face adversity with humor instead of tears." He paused. "And I know that I have not stopped thinking about you since the moment I pulled you from that snowbank." Catherine's cheeks flushed pink. Thomas was looking between them with confusion and something that might have been hope. "This is insane," Catherine said, but her voice had softened. "Maybe. But is it any more insane than the alternative? You lose your position, your reputation, everything you have worked for." Frank took a step closer to her. "I am not a rich man, Catherine, but I have a steady job, a good horse, and I can promise to treat you with respect and kindness. That is more than some marriages start with." "But we do not love each other." "Not yet," Frank agreed. "But we could. I think we could." The silence stretched out. Frank's heart was hammering so hard, he was sure everyone could hear it. What was he doing? Proposing marriage to a woman he had known for barely 24 hours? But somehow it felt right. She felt right. Finally, Catherine spoke. "If I agree to this, I have conditions." "Name them." "I want to continue teaching, if possible. I want children someday, but not right away. And I want a real marriage, Frank, not some arrangement on paper. If we do this, I want us to try to make it real." Frank felt something warm unfold in his chest. "I want that too. All of it." Thomas cleared his throat. "Well, this is the most unusual conversation I have ever had on my front porch. Kate, are you sure about this?" Catherine looked at Frank for a long moment. He could see her weighing everything, considering all the angles. Then to his amazement, she smiled. Yes, I think I am." Thomas shook his head, but he was smiling too. All right then, come inside, both of you. We have a lot to plan, and my daughters are going to be very excited to meet their new uncle. The next few days passed in a whirlwind. Frank rode back to the Double Bar Ranch to speak with his boss, a gruff but fair man named Samuel Morrison, who had given him a chance when he had first arrived in California. To Frank's relief, Morrison was supportive. "About time you settled down," Morrison said, clapping Frank on the shoulder. "You have been alone too long. Bring her by the ranch when things calm down. My wife will want to meet her." Frank also sent word to the small church in Yuba City, arranging for the marriage to take place on Sunday. It was fast, perhaps too fast, but that was the point. The faster they married, the less scandal there would be about their night in the cabin. Katherine spent her days at Thomas's farm, reacquainting herself with her nieces. Mary and Jane were sweet girls who had clearly been starved for maternal affection since their mother died. They took to Katherine immediately, and Frank's heart melted a little when he saw her with them, patient and kind, reading them stories and braiding their hair. On Saturday evening, Katherine and Frank took a walk along the frozen river. It was the first time they had been alone since arriving at the farm, and Frank was nervous in a way he had not been even during the war. Tomorrow they would be married. Tomorrow Katherine would become his wife. "Having second thoughts?" Katherine asked, as if reading his mind. "No, you?" "Every 5 minutes." She laughed softly. "But then I think about the alternative, and the second thoughts go away." She stopped walking and turned to face him. "Frank, I need to know something. Are you doing this just to save my reputation? Or is there more to it?" Frank took her hands in his. They were warm, despite the cold, small and strong. "I would be lying if I said reputation was not part of it. But it isn't the main part. Katherine, I have been alone for a long time. I stopped believing I would find someone who understood me, who I could talk to the way I talk to you. And then you fell into that snowbank, and everything changed. That is a rather dramatic way to meet someone." "You are a rather dramatic person." He smiled. "In the best possible way." Katherine laughed, and the sound warmed him more than any fire could have. "I feel the same way. It is crazy and impulsive and probably foolish. But I want this. I want you." Frank leaned down and kissed her. It was their first kiss, gentle and tentative and full of promise. When they pulled apart, Katherine was smiling. "Tomorrow, then," she said. Tomorrow. The wedding took place on a crisp, clear Sunday morning. The church was small, built from rough-hewn logs, but it was warm and welcoming. Thomas walked Katherine down the aisle, and Frank's breath caught when he saw her. She wore a simple blue dress that Thomas's late wife had owned, altered to fit Katherine's slender frame. Her hair was pinned up, and she carried a small bouquet of dried flowers that Mary and Jane had made for her. The ceremony was simple and beautiful. Frank spoke his vows with a clear voice, meaning every word. Katherine's voice trembled slightly, but her eyes were steady on his. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Frank kissed her gently, aware of the small congregation watching. They held a modest reception at Thomas's farm. Morrison and his wife came, as did some of Thomas's neighbors and a few of Frank's friends from the ranch. Katherine was gracious and warm with everyone, and Frank found himself falling a little more in love with her with every passing hour. As evening fell and the guests began to leave, Frank felt nervousness creeping back in. He had arranged for them to stay in a small house on the Double Bar Ranch, a place Morrison kept for married hands. It was just 2 rooms, but it was clean and private and theirs. They rode to the ranch in Morrison's wagon, which he had loaned them along with a team of horses as a wedding gift. The house was small but charming, sitting at the edge of a meadow with a view of the mountains. Someone, probably Morrison's wife, had left wood stacked by the fireplace and food in the larder. Frank lit a fire while Katherine explored their new home. When he turned around, she was standing in the doorway of the bedroom, looking uncertain. "Katherine," he said softly, "we do not have to rush anything. I meant what I said about wanting a real marriage, but that does not mean we cannot take our time. Relief flooded her face. Thank you. I want that too. The real marriage. But maybe we could just talk tonight. Get to know each other better. I would like that. They sat by the fire, sharing the bread and cheese they found in the larder, talking long into the night. They talked about their childhoods, their dreams, their fears. Katherine told him about losing her parents to cholera when she was 15, about the terror and responsibility of suddenly being orphaned. Frank told her about watching his brothers ride off to war, knowing somehow that they would not come back. We have both lost so much, Katherine said quietly. Maybe that is why we found each other, so we could stop losing and start building. They fell asleep in the bed together, fully clothed, Katherine's head resting on Frank's shoulder. It felt natural and right, and Frank thought that maybe, just maybe, this impulsive decision would turn out to be the best thing he had ever done. The weeks that followed were an adjustment. Frank worked long days at the ranch, up before dawn to tend to the horses and cattle, not returning until after dark. Katherine threw herself into making their small house a home, sewing curtains, planting an early garden, learning to cook on the temperamental wood stove. They learned each other's rhythms and habits. Frank discovered that Katherine sang to herself while she worked, old folk songs from Ohio that made him smile. Katherine learned that Frank was meticulous about caring for his horse and tools, that he read books about horse training whenever he could get his hands on them, that he had a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard and made her laugh. They grew closer slowly but surely. Conversations over dinner became longer and more intimate. Sitting together by the fire became natural. And one night, about a month after their wedding, Katherine reached for Frank's hand and led him to the bedroom with a look that made his heart race. Their wedding night, delayed though it was gentle and sweet. Frank was patient and careful, and Katherine was brave and trusting. Afterward, lying tangled together in the moonlight streaming through the window, Katherine whispered, "I love you." Frank kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "I love you too. I think I have since the moment I saw you in that snowbank. That is ridiculous. Probably, but true anyway." Spring came to the Sierra Nevada mountains in a rush of green and wildflowers. Katherine's garden flourished, and she spent her afternoons tending to vegetables and herbs. Frank taught her to ride, patient and encouraging as she learned to handle his mare. They rode together on Sundays, exploring the mountains and valleys around Yuba City, finding hidden meadows and crystal-clear streams. Katherine had worried that she would not be able to teach after the marriage, but Morrison's wife, Margaret, had other ideas. Margaret was on the school board, and she championed Katherine's cause, arguing that a married woman could teach just as well as an unmarried one. By May, Katherine had a position at the small schoolhouse in town, teaching children ranging from 6 to 14. Frank could see how happy it made her. She would come home full of stories about her students, about breakthroughs and challenges, and he loved watching her face light up when she talked about them. He had worried that she might resent giving up her independence, but instead, their marriage seemed to give her more freedom, not less. Summer brought long, hot days and shorter nights. Frank and Katherine fell into a comfortable rhythm. She would wake early to make breakfast before he left for the ranch. He would come home dusty and tired to find dinner waiting, and Katherine eager to hear about his day. They would sit on the small porch they had built together, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple. One evening in August, Katherine seemed nervous. She kept fidgeting with her skirt, starting to speak and then stopping. Finally, Frank set down the bridle he was mending and looked at her. "What is on your mind?" Katherine took a deep breath. "I went to see Dr. Harrison in town today." Frank's heart jumped. "Are you ill?" "No, not ill." She smiled, and it was the most beautiful smile he had ever seen. "I am pregnant. We are going to have a baby." For a moment, Frank could not move, could not speak. Then he was on his feet, pulling Katherine into his arms, holding her so tight she laughed and protested that he would squeeze the baby right out of her. A baby, he repeated, pulling back to look at her face. We are going to have a baby. In March, the doctor thinks. Are you happy? Happy? Frank laughed, a sound of pure joy. Katherine, I am beyond happy. I am terrified and amazed and so grateful I can barely breathe. I am terrified too, Katherine admitted. I have never done this before. What if I am not a good mother? You are wonderful with your nieces. You will be a wonderful mother. He kissed her, deep and thorough. We are going to do this together. All of it. The months that followed were some of the happiest of Frank's life. He watched in awe as Katherine's body changed, as their baby grew inside her. He built a cradle from pine wood, carving intricate designs into the headboard. Katherine sewed tiny clothes and blankets, her hands moving constantly, preparing for the new life they had created. Winter returned, bringing snow to the mountains. Katherine had to stop teaching in January when her condition became too obvious, but she did not seem to mind. She spent her days at home, preparing the nursery they had made from half of their bedroom, reading books about childbirth and infant care. Frank found himself remembering his mother, wishing she could be there to meet his child. But he also felt her presence somehow, in the way Katherine hummed while she worked, in the warmth of their small home, in the promise of new life. The baby came on a cold March night during a snowstorm. It seemed fitting somehow that their child would arrive during snow, just as their love story had begun in a snowbank. Katherine's labor was long and difficult, and Frank stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand, wiping her forehead, feeling utterly helpless and terrified. But when the baby finally arrived, squalling and red-faced and perfect, all the fear melted away. Dr. Harrison cleaned and wrapped the infant, then placed the tiny bundle in Katherine's arms. A boy, the doctor said, smiling. A healthy boy. Katherine looked down at their son with wonder and exhaustion. Frank sat on the edge of the bed, his arm around his wife, staring at the miracle they had made. The baby had Katherine's dark hair and a face scrunched up in newborn confusion. What should we name him? Katherine asked softly. Frank thought about his father, his brothers, all the men he had lost. James, he said. After my father, if that is all right with you. James Iverson. Katherine smiled. It is perfect. Little James proved to be a demanding but wonderful addition to their lives. Frank had never known he could love something so small and helpless with such fierce intensity. He would come home from the ranch, eager to hold his son, to feel that tiny weight in his arms, to watch James sleep or eat or stare around with unfocused eyes. Katherine was an amazing mother, patient and loving and completely devoted. She nursed James while reading books, played with him on the floor, sang him the same songs she had sung while working before he was born. Frank would sometimes stop in the doorway and just watch them, his heart so full he thought it might burst. Spring turned to summer, and James grew from a tiny infant to a chubby baby with a ready smile. He recognized his parents, laughing when Frank made funny faces, reaching for Katherine whenever she was near. Thomas and the girls visited often, and Mary and Jane doted on their little cousin with all the enthusiasm of young girls who desperately wanted a baby to play with. One Sunday afternoon, when James was about 6 months old, Frank and Katherine took him on a ride through the mountains. It was James's first real outing beyond the farm, and Katherine was anxious about it. But Frank had fashioned a carrier that held the baby securely against his chest. James seemed delighted by the movement and the fresh air, his eyes wide as he took in the world around him. They rode to the line cabin, the place where everything had started. It looked just as it had that snowy day 2 years ago, though now wildflowers bloomed around it and birds sang in the pines. Hard to believe that we barely knew each other when we stayed here, Katherine said, dismounting with Frank's help. Hard to believe I lived without you before that day. Frank kissed her gently, careful not to jostle James between them. They went inside the cabin, Someone had clearly been using it recently. The fireplace was clean, and fresh supplies lined the shelves. But to Frank, it still felt like their place, the spot where their real marriage had begun. "Do you ever regret it?" Katherine asked suddenly. "Marrying me so quickly? Taking on so much responsibility?" Frank looked at her in surprise. "Never. Not once, do you?" "No, but sometimes I wonder what you gave up. You could have married someone from around here, someone you had courted properly, someone who did not come with so much baggage and drama." Frank handed James to Katherine and took her face in his hands. "Katherine Iverson, you listen to me. You are the best thing that has ever happened to me. You and James. I did not give up anything. I gained everything." He kissed her forehead. "I love you, more now than I did the day we married, and more tomorrow than I do today." Tears shimmered in Katherine's eyes. "I love you too, so much." They stayed at the cabin for a while, sharing a simple meal, letting James explore the floor on a blanket. Then they rode back home, arriving just as the sun was setting behind the mountains. The years that followed were full and rich. When James was 2, Katherine discovered she was pregnant again. This time, Frank was less terrified and more excited, though he still hovered over Katherine like a worried hen. Their second child, a daughter they named Rose after Frank's mother, arrived on a warm September day. She was tiny and delicate, with Katherine's brown eyes and Frank's blonde hair. James was fascinated by his baby sister, always wanting to help, to hold her, to show her his toys. Frank built an addition onto their small house, adding 2 more rooms so the children could have their own spaces as they grew. Katherine returned to teaching part-time, with Margaret Morrison offering to watch the children when needed. Life was not always easy. There were hard winters when money was tight, summers when drought threatened the ranch and Frank's job. There were illnesses and injuries, the normal struggles of raising children and maintaining a household. But through it all, Frank and Katherine remained partners, supporting each other, loving each other, building the life they had impulsively started in a snowstorm. When James was 5 and Rose was 3, Katherine discovered she was pregnant again. This time it was twins, 2 boys they named Thomas and Matthew. The house was suddenly chaotic and loud and full of laughter and tears. Frank could barely remember what silence sounded like, and he loved it. The children grew like wildflowers, each with their own personality. James was serious and thoughtful, always reading or helping his father with the horses. Rose was fierce and independent, insisting on doing everything her brothers did. Thomas and Matthew were mischievous troublemakers who seemed to communicate in their own twin language. Frank advanced at the ranch, eventually becoming Morrison's foreman when the old foreman retired. It meant more responsibility, but also better pay, and they were able to save money, even buy a small piece of land of their own. Katherine continued teaching, becoming beloved in the community for her patience and dedication to her students. One winter evening, when the children were all finally asleep and the house was quiet, Frank and Katherine sat by the fire as they had done countless times over the years. Katherine's hair was streaked with gray now, though she was only in her early 30s. Frank had lines around his eyes from years of squinting in the sun. But when he looked at her, he still saw the woman he had pulled from the snowbank, brave and beautiful and his. "Do you remember that day?" Katherine asked, as if reading his thoughts. "When I fell from the stagecoach. Every detail. The way your dress looked against the snow. The terror I felt when I thought I might not find you in time. The way your hand felt when I pulled you out." "I thought I was going to die," Katherine said quietly. "And then you were there, my cowboy in the snow." Frank laughed. "I am not sure I have ever been called a cowboy before." "That is what you were, though. Are my hero who rode to the rescue." She leaned against his shoulder. "Thank you for saving me that day, for saving me every day since. You saved me too, you know. I was just going through the motions before you, living but not really alive. You gave me purpose and love and a family. I should be thanking you. Then we are even. I suppose we are. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the fire burn low. Outside, snow was falling again, covering the world in white. But inside their home, surrounded by the evidence of the life they had built together, Frank had never felt warmer or more content. More years passed in a blur of activity and growth. The children started school, all of them showing their mother's love of learning. James announced that he wanted to be a veterinarian, inspired by his father's work with horses. Rose declared she would be a teacher like her mother, and nothing anyone said could dissuade her. The twins were still young enough that their dreams changed weekly, from cowboys to sheriffs to train engineers. Frank continued working at the Double Bar Ranch, but he also started training horses on their own land. He had a gift for it, people said, a way of understanding what a horse needed, how to bring out the best in the animal without breaking its spirit. Soon people were bringing him horses from all over the region, and the extra income allowed them to expand their home again, to buy more land, to ensure their children would have opportunities they had never had. Catherine's teaching evolved too. She started offering lessons to adults in the evening, teaching immigrants and others who had never learned to read. It was hard work, often frustrating, but deeply rewarding. Frank would watch her with her students, patient and encouraging, and fall in love with her all over again. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Frank surprised Katherine with a trip. Thomas agreed to watch the children, and Frank and Katherine rode back to the line cabin in the mountains. It was summer this time, the trails clear and easy, wildflowers blooming in every color imaginable. The cabin was the same, though perhaps a bit more weathered. They spent the night there, talking and laughing, and making love like they were newlyweds again. In the morning, they carved their names into one of the logs above the fireplace, a permanent reminder of where their story had begun. 10 years, Katherine marveled as they rode home. It feels like forever and no time at all. 10 more, Frank said, and 10 after that, and 10 after that. You think we will make it that long? I know we will. And they did. Years continued to unfold, bringing changes and challenges and joys. The children grew into young adults. James left for college in Sacramento to study veterinary medicine. Rose followed a few years later, determined to get her teaching certificate. The twins, as different as they were identical, chose different paths. Thomas stayed on the ranch, learning the horse training business from his father. Matthew joined the army, riding home with tales of adventure and distant places. Frank and Katherine grew older together, their bodies showing the wear of hard work and full lives. But their love remained constant, the bedrock on which everything else was built. They still talked late into the night. They still held hands when they walked. They still laughed at each other's jokes and supported each other's dreams. The grandchildren started arriving when Frank and Katherine were in their early 50s. James married a woman he met in Sacramento, a doctor's daughter with a sharp mind and kind heart. They had 3 children in quick succession, all with James's serious nature and his wife's quick smile. Rose married a fellow teacher, and they had 2 daughters who reminded Frank of Rose at that age, fierce and independent and full of life. Thomas married a rancher's daughter from a neighboring property, expanding the Iverson landholdings and ensuring the horse training business would continue into the next generation. Matthew, still in the army, was stationed too far away to visit often, but his letters spoke of a woman he had met, a possibility of future happiness. One evening, as Frank and Katherine sat on their porch watching the sunset, surrounded by the sounds of their grandchildren playing in the yard, Katherine turned to him with tears in her eyes. "What is wrong?" Frank asked immediately, concerned. "Nothing is wrong. Everything is right." She wiped her eyes. "Do you remember that day on the stagecoach? I was so scared, Frank. Not just of falling, but of what my life was going to be. I was 30 years old and alone, going to live with my brother because I had nowhere else to go. I thought my life was over before it really began. And instead it was just beginning. You gave me everything, Frank. Love and family and purpose. A home and a partner and a reason to wake up grateful every morning. She took his hand. I know we started this marriage for practical reasons, to save my reputation, to give you companionship, but somewhere along the way it became real, the most real thing in my life. Frank lifted her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles gently. It was always real for me, from the moment I saw you in that snowbank, maybe even before that. Maybe I was just waiting for you to fall into my life. Katherine laughed through her tears. That is the worst metaphor I have ever heard. Too bad, you are stuck with me and my terrible metaphors. I suppose I am, for better or worse. Mostly better, though. Mostly better, she agreed. They sat together as the sun disappeared behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and gold. Their grandchildren's laughter rang through the air. Smoke from the chimney curled up toward the stars, beginning to appear in the darkening sky. And Frank thought that this, right here, was everything he had never known he wanted, everything he had needed. The years continued their inexorable march. Frank and Katherine grew old together, their bodies slowing but their spirits remaining strong. They celebrated their 25th anniversary with a party that brought together 3 generations of Iversons, the house overflowing with family and laughter and love. James had established a successful veterinary practice in Sacramento and often came home to visit with his growing family. Rose taught at the same school where her mother had once worked, carrying on the family tradition. Thomas had taken over the horse training business entirely, allowing Frank to finally retire and spend his days doing whatever he pleased. Matthew had left the army and married his sweetheart, settling in Oregon, where he worked as a logger. Frank's greatest pleasure in his later years was teaching his grandchildren to ride. He had the patience and gentleness that made him a natural instructor, and the children adored their grandfather. Katherine would watch from the porch as Frank led one child or another around the corral, his voice calm and encouraging, and she would smile, remembering the patient way he had taught her to ride all those years ago. On their 30th anniversary, the entire family gathered again. There were now 8 grandchildren, ranging from toddlers to teenagers, and the house that Frank had built and expanded over the years was barely large enough to hold everyone. They had a feast with food contributed by every family member, and afterward, Frank and Katherine danced in the yard while someone played a fiddle. You are still a terrible dancer, Katherine teased as Frank stepped on her foot for the 3rd time. And you are still beautiful enough that no one notices, Frank replied, making her laugh. Later that night, after everyone had left or gone to bed, Frank and Katherine walked down to the small creek that ran through their property. The moon was full, reflecting off the water in silver ripples. They sat on the bank, their shoulders touching, listening to the sounds of the night. I have been thinking, Katherine said. That is never good. She elbowed him gently. Be serious for a moment. I have been thinking about how our life could have been different. If I had not fallen from that stagecoach, if you had not been riding that trail that day, if the storm had not trapped us in the cabin. Do you wish things had been different? No, never. But I am grateful for every coincidence and accident that brought us together. Sometimes I think about that woman I was, traveling to Yuba City alone, thinking her life was essentially over. And I want to tell her that the best part is about to begin. Frank put his arm around her, pulling her close. We were lucky, both of us, to find each other, to build this life. Luck had something to do with it, but we did the work too. We chose each other every day, even when it was hard, especially when it was hard. I would choose you again, in every lifetime, in every circumstance. You are my partner, Katherine, my best friend, the love of my life. Katherine rested her head on his shoulder. And you are mine, my cowboy in the snow, my impulsive proposal in front of my brother's house, my husband and father of my children, my everything. They sat by the creek until the moon was high overhead, talking about their children and grandchildren, remembering funny stories from over the years, planning for the future they still had ahead of them. And when they finally walked back to the house, hand in hand like they had walked 1,000 times before, Frank felt a deep contentment settle in his bones. This was what he had saved her from the snowbank for. Not just to live, but to truly be alive, to love and be loved, to create a family and a legacy, to turn a moment of chance and danger into a lifetime of happiness. The final years of Frank and Catherine's life together were peaceful ones. They moved into a smaller house on the property when the main house became too much for them to manage, leaving it for Thomas and his growing family. They spent their days in simple pleasures, tending a small garden, reading together on the porch, visiting with children and grandchildren who stopped by regularly. Frank's health began to fail when he was in his early 70s. Nothing dramatic, just the slow wearing down of a body that had worked hard for so many years. Katherine nursed him with the same patience and love she had shown to their children when they were young. She read to him when his eyes grew too tired, helped him walk when his legs grew weak, and held his hand through the long nights when pain kept him awake. One spring morning, almost 40 years to the day after Katherine had fallen from the stagecoach, Frank woke to find her sitting in the chair beside their bed, watching the sunrise through the window. She looked tired but peaceful, her white hair glowing in the golden light. "Come back to bed," Frank said, his voice rough with sleep and age. Katherine turned to him, smiling. "I was just thinking about that day, when you pulled me from the snow. Did you know then what you were getting into?" "Not even close. I thought I was just saving a woman from freezing. I had no idea I was meeting my wife. Your very demanding wife who gave you 4 children and turned your quiet life upside down." "The best thing that ever happened to me," Frank said firmly. Katherine came to the bed and lay down beside him. They fit together perfectly after all these years, her body curving into his like 2 pieces of a puzzle. "I love you, Frank Iverson. I have loved you since that cabin, since you gave me your coat and made me coffee and treated me with such gentleness and respect. Thank you for giving me this life. Thank you for saying yes when I made that crazy proposal. Thank you for taking a chance on me." They lay together in comfortable silence, watching the sun climb higher in the sky. Frank could hear birds singing outside, could smell Catherine's lavender soap, could feel the steady beat of her heart against his chest. He thought about everything they had built together, all the love and joy and occasional sorrow that had filled their years, and he felt grateful, so deeply grateful for every moment. Frank lived for another 3 years, surrounded by family and love. When he finally passed away on a quiet winter morning, Katherine was holding his hand, and their children and grandchildren filled the room with their presence. He went peacefully, his last word a whispered, "Katherine," that made her smile even through her tears. Katherine lived for 5 more years after Frank's death. She spent her time with her family, teaching her great-grandchildren to read, working in her garden, and taking long walks to the creek where she and Frank had spent so many evenings talking. She missed him every day, but she also felt his presence everywhere. In the house he had built, in the land he had worked, in the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who carried his legacy forward. On a cold March morning, almost 50 years after she had fallen from that stagecoach into a snowbank, Katherine passed away peacefully in her sleep. Her children found her with a smile on her face, and in her hand was a photograph taken on her wedding day. She looked young and happy in the picture, standing beside Frank, who gazed at her with such obvious love that it was almost painful to see. They buried Katherine beside Frank in the small cemetery on the hill overlooking their property. The entire family gathered for the funeral. 3 generations of Iversons who existed because a stagecoach wheel had broken and a cowboy had been riding by at just the right moment. Rose, who was now a grandmother herself, stood at the graveside and told the story of how her parents had met, the dramatic rescue from the snowbank, the night in the cabin, the impulsive proposal, the rushed wedding, and then the 50 years of love and partnership that had followed. proving that sometimes the most important decisions are the ones we make in an instant. They built something beautiful, Rose said, her voice carrying across the assembled family. From one moment of chance and courage, they created all of this, all of us. And while they are gone now, what they built remains. In every one of us, in the love we share, in the values they taught us. They showed us that love is not just a feeling, but a choice, made every day in big ways and small. After the funeral, the family gathered at the main house. The great-grandchildren played in the yard where Frank and Catherine's children had once played. The grandchildren swapped stories about their grandparents, laughing and crying in equal measure, and the children, now elderly themselves, sat together and remembered. They were so young when they met, James said, looking at the photograph from their wedding day. Younger than my own grandchildren are now. How did they know it would work? I do not think they did know, Rose replied. I think they just decided to try, and then kept deciding, every day for 50 years. We were lucky to have them, Thomas added. Both of them, they gave us everything. They gave us each other, Matthew said, gesturing to the family filling the house. That was their real gift, not just life, but family, connection, love. As evening fell and the family slowly dispersed, going back to their own homes and lives, the house grew quiet. But it was not empty. The walls held the echoes of Catherine's laughter and Frank's calm voice. The porch remembered their evenings watching the sunset. The creek still whispered the secrets they had shared on its banks. And in the mountains above Yuba City, a small log cabin with a red door stood among the pines. Inside, carved into the log above the fireplace, two names remained: Frank and Katherine, forever linked, forever together, forever proof that sometimes the best love stories begin in the most unexpected ways, with a broken wheel and a snowbank and a cowboy who decided to help a stranger in need. The years continued to pass, as they always do. The Iverson family grew and changed and evolved, but at its heart remained the values that Frank and Katherine had instilled: hard work and kindness, love and loyalty, the importance of family, and the courage to take chances when they presented themselves. Thomas's children took over the horse training business, expanding it into one of the most respected operations in Northern California. Rose's daughters both became teachers, carrying on the family tradition into a third generation. James's grandchildren included two veterinarians, a doctor, and a nurse, all of them dedicated to healing and helping others. Matthew's descendants spread across the West, but they always came back to Yuba City for reunions, drawn by the pull of family and history. And every year, on the anniversary of Frank and Catherine's wedding, the family would gather at the cemetery. They would tell the story again, making sure the youngest generation knew how it had all begun, with a stagecoach accident and a snowbank and a moment that changed everything. The story became a family legend, passed down through generations. Great-great-grandchildren who had never met Frank and Katherine still knew about the cowboy who saved the teacher from the snow and then married her 3 days later. They knew about the cabin where their love had truly begun. They knew about the 50 years of partnership that had followed, the challenges overcome, and the joys celebrated. The small house where Frank and Katherine had lived out their final years remained in the family, preserved as a reminder of where it had all started. Visitors could still see the furniture Frank had built, the garden where Katherine had grown her herbs, the porch where they had spent countless evenings together. It became a place of pilgrimage for the family, a touchstone connecting them to their past and to the love that had created their future. And high in the Sierra Nevada mountains, the line cabin still stood. Time and weather had worn it down, but the family maintained it, recognizing its importance to their history. Inside, above the fireplace, the names carved into the log remained clearly visible: Frank and Katherine Iverson, a testament to a love that had begun in desperation and grown into something beautiful and lasting. On winter days when snow fell heavy and deep, blanketing the mountains in white, It was easy to imagine it all happening again. A stagecoach rounding a bend, a broken wheel, a woman tumbling into a snowbank, a cowboy racing to help. Two strangers whose lives were about to become forever intertwined. It was a story of chance and choice, of courage and commitment, a reminder that the most important moments in life often come when we least expect them, and that the decision to help a stranger, to take a risk, to choose love over safety can echo through generations. Frank and Catherine never knew how far their legacy would reach. They could not have imagined the dozens of descendants who would carry their names and their values forward into the future. They simply lived their lives with love and integrity, building something solid and true that would outlast them both. But perhaps that is the most remarkable part of their story. They did not set out to create a legacy. They just decided to try, to build a life together, to choose each other every day. And from those small daily choices came something magnificent, a family, a love story for the ages, proof that sometimes falling into a snowbank is not the end of a journey, but the beginning of the greatest adventure of all.